Finally, after all the excitement regarding Argentinosaurus has died down a little, Haolonggood offers something a lot more humble, but still pretty exciting, because we so seldom get chasmosaurians, and here we have one, Utahceratops. Utahceratops means what you might guess it means, and like the last ceratopsian, the 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗀𝗀ceratops has pretty decent remains. It's always nice to have dinosaur models of animals with real substance behind them. Incidentally, Utahceratops and Cosmoceratops were described together in the same paper, so you get two for the price of one. Utahceratops is estimated at about 6 meters or 19.7 feet long. This model measures about 17 centimeters or 6.7 inches, which puts it quite nicely at 1:35. The model is about 10 centimeters or 3.9 inches tall. There are two color variants, and Haolonggood is back to its old pattern of offering different colors for the same pattern. Fortunately, the colors are both so soothing and well blended that this can easily be overlooked, especially if you get just one. There's the green version, and you know I love soothing greens, but also equally exciting is the brown, because it's so reminiscent of my previous collected Utahceratops, also done in a very soothing earth tone, so this feels like a real upgrade. The pose this time is again quite different from the neutral walking pose, a more transitionary one, and you can see the head down pose. Haolonggood even suggests a possibility here, which you could recreate if you like. I love how from different angles you get a sense of dynamic movement because of how the legs are posed. Let's start with the brown. Right here, the beautiful colors just jump out at you. You see how the dark accents on the edges frame different regions really nicely. The keratinous bits are nicely painted, and of course all round smooth blends as the colors transition from one to another. You'll notice that this close-up, the scales have a rougher appearance, but to put things in perspective as always is my faithful Ramen. The most distinguishing features in ceratopsians being the head, this is naturally an area of great interest to us. Now right off, I think that Haolonggood has done a splendid job. In terms of the more obvious, some autapomorphies we can see signs of respect for are the caudally positioned nasal horn, where you see in this image that it's so far back it's almost behind the external nares. And that's what you indeed see here. I really like the addition of this dark brown in the ring around the base of the horn. Then the supraorbital horn claws are short and posterolaterally directed. You certainly see that here. They're painted very well. As are also the other areas, such as the epiossifications. The shape of the frill is also pretty distinctive. In Utahceratops, the frill is reminiscent of Pentaceratops, tapering caudally, and you see that nicely depicted here. Very importantly, we have the median embayment, and its very open form is faithfully captured. Now why this is important, I'll talk about later. The frill decorations. Of course, this is very subjective, but there's something about this I can't get into in the pale blue against the dark red here. but somehow it strikes me as having a more natural fade than in other ceratopsians we've seen. Now, typically, in non-Chasmosaurus chasmosaurines, you have relatively large epijugal ossifications, and you see that here as well. The eyes, while carefully painted with a very nicely centered pupil, brings back that slightly comical aesthetic seen in earlier models. The mouth is closed and non-articulated, which is nice, and you can see here again that nicely painted beak. Interestingly, the body as reconstructed in the Sampson et al. Paper follows the bow plan seen in Pentaceratops, with that hump and somewhat broken back appearance. This isn't surprising, considering that in their analysis, Sampson et al. Recovered both Utahceratops and Pentaceratops as sister taxa. This time, Haolonggood also doesn't quite capture that look, though it's hinted at, and one could of course consider the posture itself, not to mention speculate as to how much this area might have been filled in with thick ligaments and musculature. Otherwise, the bow plan is as you'd expect, with very fine detail to match. Now we can look at the detail in the body. And yes, Haolonggood did manage to squeeze in some squiggles, but this time there's nothing to complain about in terms of their application. And I love those obliquely oriented stripes with two color tones. There's a kind of a layered cake appearance here that's really cool and tasty. Now dorsally, you'll also see some larger scutes here. Speaking of color complexity, you can see a hint of purple in this area. And as we go down the shoulder here, and I've always felt that the arm is where you can really see how fine details can get. This is especially so in the forearms here. Now look at the variation of scales and how they flow parallel to where the wrist crease would be here. And of course, the manus. The hand is very pleasingly sculpted, with that weight bearing on the medial fingers. The previously painted lateral angles that we saw happily corrected in their Triceratops finally, and happily that's been continued here. The detail in the hind limbs are no less beautifully textured and painted. I really do love these obliquely directed stripes, which is a fresh look. And speaking of paint, I love how the limb gets progressively darker as we move distally down to those black claws. Then finally down the very short tail. And a quick look at the underside. And now the green. And this time, we're going to a green-based palette. But whoa, look at just how beautifully faded the colors are. And what's really nice is the infusion of a kind of brown-green into the stripes here. I can easily imagine this being very easily camouflaged amongst some foliage. Now looking closely at the head now, you'll see that the frill patterns are more integrated in terms of the color than the brown. The same kind of detail and coloration you'll see in the brown, but in a different color, and it gives you a different look and feel. The horns have a greenish bias, and it's really quite wonderful that it's got both a natural and also a mineral look, if you know what I mean. Again, the skin here follows the kind of bumpier texture that we saw in the 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 The color complexity we saw in the brown is also here in the green. It's quite nice that even in the green overall, we see a kind of purple-brown streaking alongside the greens here. This is the kind of paint application that makes Haolonggood so pleasing. Now a once-over of the body. The arms, forearms, then the hands. Again, just look at those fine scales going into the periphery. I really like how the dark in the hands and the feet here have green mixed into the black, which is such a pleasing look. And then the thighs. To the feet. Just such nice detail here too. Then here we have the tail. You see more of the detail and color we've already seen elsewhere. And the underside. Now so much for a look at the Utahceratops itself. I've said that minor anatomical details might not bother many collectors, and they'll be all the happier for it. For those who do care, seeing a model carry the features they look out for is especially satisfying. This is particularly true when a seemingly minor anatomical detail forms an element in a larger story. Such is the case with the humble median embayment. And a genesis is a mode of evolution where one species transitions directly into another without branching. Suggested examples for this might be the sequence going from Triceratops horridus to the 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗃 sp to Triceratops prorsus. Another example might be the Spletosaurus storosus, the wilsoni, the Horneri. Fowler and Fowler 2020 conducted a landmark-based morphometric analysis comparing the parietal shape of 19 specimens representing 9 taxa. 16 landmarks were plotted and mirrored on both left and right for consistency. The results suggest an anagenetic evolution in Chasmosaurine ceratopsids that began with Utahceratops as a basal member of this lineage and ending with 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗃. A main point of the argument is changes seen in the median embayment over time. Now we've talked about this before. The median embayment can be thought of as simply this notch in the frill. Utahceratops, the oldest member of this sequence, has an open and relatively unmodified embayment. This is the basal morphology. Moving forward in time, we see taxa like 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗃 and Terminocavus with progressively shallower or closing embayments. This sequential change continued until by the time we get to 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗃, the embayment is almost fully closed, marking the end of this evolutionary continuum. This also seems to line up with the stratigraphic record, with Utahceratops found in older rock layers, and 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗃, Terminocavus, and finally 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗃 appearing in successively younger layers. By considering a seemingly insignificant feature, we gain a window, into how these animals evolve over time. Now, comparisons. Now, first, of course, we compare them to each other. Both have such a soothing look this time, simply because of how smoothly their colours are blended together, and how softly too they're coloured. The orange looks like it might exist in a more woody environment, and the green a more forested one. I love them both, but in terms of the colour in the frill, I think that the edge goes to the green, where the colours look more cohesively tied together. Again, we're back to Haolonggood's usual stenciled patterns in different colours, but when both are coloured so beautifully, I can have very few complaints about that. Now, my only other Utahceratops, this 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 a combination of a subdued earth color, a harmless demeanor, and a size small enough to display anywhere. It makes sense to compare to the only model I have of its sister taxon, the Haolonggood Utahceratops. Again, it's a real pity how big this model was, and hopefully one day Haolonggood might decide to revisit it with improved detail, paint application, and a closer to 1:35 scale. A couple more chasmosaurines. Here's the Haolonggood Cosmoceratops, which incidentally was described in the same paper. Now the Haolonggood Chasmosaurus, a favorite of mine. Now both are wonderful examples of how well Haolonggood can handle 1:35 dinosaurs, and these just look amazing together. Another chasmosaurine, the Taurosaurus. And finally, the largest chasmosaurine that Haolonggood has done, the Haolonggood Triceratops. It's really great to see how different members of the same clade are sized so differently. Not forgetting, of course, our standard size comparators, the Wilson T-Rex and the Cameron T-Rex. So that's it for the Haolonggood Utahceratops. Our last review, I praised Haolonggood for giving us 1:35 sauropods and essentially cornering the market on that side of things. But at the pace it's given us dinosaurs and improved its sculpting and painting, it's also given us so many ceratopsians to fill out the phylogeny. Not just for the centrosaurines, but the chasmosaurines as well. I don't know how they deliver so much, so fast, so affordably, but if they keep going, I've no doubt they'll eventually help me fill out my most wanted cladograms. So that's it for me, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.